Here's an interesting company. It's the main Portuguese utility. It's partly owned by the state, partly a quoted company as well. Portugal is I think, perhaps one of the most interesting economies in the world from the point of view of renewable power. They've got great hydro resources, they've got great solar resources, but they're also developing wave and tidal, and in some cases they're collaborating with British companies. EDP has acquired wind assets in North America. It's acquired renewable assets throughout Europe, and increasingly it's active in Asia. So it's doing very well, and its share price has actually held up very nicely in the last year of stock market turmoil. But it's not resting on its laurels. It's set up a separate company called EDP Innovation, which has, like the Carbon Trust, a VC fund. And that VC fund is investing in companies, companies which may turn out to be important to EDP's business. So in some respects, EDP is buying a stake in future businesses which it may be able to then market through its global network. For example, it has co-invested with Scottish and Southern, and with a fund, a VC fund, another one of those funds set up by Scottish and Southern called Sigma, in a company called Onzo. But I'll just briefly mention them as an example of a company, a UK company, which is growing quite rapidly, but has grown from a very small base, with a background in, I think, mainly in software and communications. It's a smart meter company, and I think we're going to see a lot more smart meters, not just in the UK, but globally, because smart meters allow for the more efficient measurement of energy use, which in turn allows for the more efficient distribution of energy, which is very good for the low-carbon economy. Here's another example of a clean tech, smallish innovator. It's a British company, which is in some respects doing for water what Onzo has done or is doing for energy. Intellitect has bundled together some technologies which allow for the remote monitoring of water. So, for example, if there's too much chlorine in some water or too little chlorine, they can measure that remotely and adjust that remotely, which is obviously more efficient and less expensive than having to do it on site. Like Onzo, Intellitect has raised money from VC investors, and it's partnering with large utilities. In the case of Intellitect, it's working in Greece and in China, as well as in the UK. I should say, just perhaps for clarity, that neither Onzo nor Intellitect are clients of Carbon International. Here is a company which is. And it's a favorite, a client of mine, if you like, because I like the simplicity of its business model. New Earth Solutions Group is a waste company. And it started essentially as a landfill. So it started very much in the sort of older industry, if you like, an industry which certainly needs to move and update itself pretty quickly. But it hasn't it has developed some of its own IP, particularly in composting, but it's also deploying other people's IP on the waste streams it controls. So rather than thinking, hang on, let's try and find a super high-tech way of turning waste into energy, the company said, right, we've got waste, we know waste, we control waste supplies, let's trial other people's IP on our waste and see which one works best, and then run with that. Like the two previous companies, they've raised money from VC investors, and they're working in partnership, or they're in the early stages of partnership with the larger utilities, which certainly need the innovative approach that New Earth Solutions provides. Now here's another company, interesting one this. This company has an application which will allow you, or not, it'll actually switch your fridge off, whether you like it or not, at half-time during a cup final. So that when you put the kettle on, the fridge goes off, and the central grid doesn't have to switch on another power station just to cater for everyone putting on their kettles at the same time. Essentially, it's I mentioned earlier, it's a company which uses software and communications technologies to provide a low-carbon solution. It's also partnering with large utilities, with the national grid. It's partnering with some very large companies who want to trial this kit, not just in a fridge, but also in a washing machine. And fingers crossed, it's looking like it's in the right space at the right time. So what do these companies have in common, and what can we learn about them, and what does that tell us about how we might innovate environmentally? Firstly, these companies are not, strictly speaking, doing research. That's done. At least they're not in the sort of early stage laboratory stage of research. Their innovation is actually in the deployment of technologies in commercial business models. Secondly, they've all raised money from venture capital investors so that they can expand quickly, enough to meet the market opportunity and not be left behind. Thirdly, they have commercial partnerships or clientele among large companies that are exposed to the environmental market sector and which provide them with an early opportunity to get their product to market. And finally, they all communicate very well. Environmental innovation is not something that you can do quietly. You've got to get out and about. You've got to speak to journalists. You've got to speak to investors. You've got to meet partners. You've got to make sure that prospective partners know about you. Because if you don't, you'll miss opportunities. So these companies have all got decent websites. They've all spent money on making sure that their message is out there. So the only question remains now, really, from an innovation perspective, is just how can you apply these essential features in your work? Well, I think the first thing to establish is what you're doing currently, which qualifies as innovation. You might have an application which would be of use to the environmental industry sector, which you just don't know about. You might be doing something particularly efficiently, and it hasn't occurred to you that, in fact, you're doing it particularly efficiently and thereby reducing environmental impact. And once you've done that, I think you can start asking yourself, well, okay, what should we further develop? Is this something we should see if we could actually expand and steal a lead on our competitors? Looking at your competitors is very important. You've got to see what they're up to, see what innovation they've done and how they've presented that to their market. Are they differentiating themselves from you? Are they stealing a competitive march on you? And then, if you do feel like you've got a service which has got potential, then partnership is key. You've got to get out there and see who would be the best partner for you to help take this further. And if indeed it's something which requires cash, if you're going to take advantage of that opportunity quickly enough, then you've got to go and speak to investors. Now, investors are seen, I think, too often seen as this kind of foreign species who are unapproachable and sort of incredibly wise and patient. Well, firstly, I think they are approachable, and you have to bear in mind that there are a lot of VC investors out there with a very strong appetite for environmental business plans. That they're desperate for that because they know that this is an area of great growth. And secondly, that they are wise, that's their job, but because this sector is still relatively new, they're still learning themselves. And that's an important factor because they will always need your education when you come to them, saying, well, this is my industry, this is how it works. A common mistake among entrepreneurs is to exaggerate the level of awareness and education among the VC investors they're approaching. Now, communications is key. I would say that, you think, well, partly what we do at Carbon International is communications, but you have to communicate internally. You've got to sit down and decide on a strategy, and then you have to communicate externally.